Thinking in Spanish is essential for communicating effortlessly and fluently. When you try to speak Spanish without thinking in Spanish, it really shows. You're slowly translating English sentences one word at a time into Spanish, which is not just slower and clunkier, it also results in incorrect and confusing translations that some Spanish speakers won't understand. You're slowly translating English sentences one word at a time into Spanish, which is not just slower and clunkier, it also results in incorrect and confusing translations that Spanish speakers won't understand. The good news is that at some point in your Spanish journey, Spanish phrases and sentence structures are going to be so natural that you're not only saying them, but thinking them, which results in smoother speaking and much better comprehension. In this video, I'll go over a tried and true technique for learning to think in Spanish one step at a time. This is a technique that's worked for thousands of our students, and it'll work for you too. To start, we need to bust some myths about what it means to start thinking in your second language. If you've watched videos from other YouTube channels about how to think in Spanish, you might expect me to tell you that the key is to stop translating in your head. But actually, I'm going to take a controversial position on this that is better defended by linguistic science. Lots of language teachers insist that in order to start thinking in Spanish, you first need to stop thinking in English. But I disagree. In fact, I believe that idea is a dogmatic position that isn't actually founded on any evidence. In reality, if you try to start out by suppressing your own natural thinking, you aren't actually taking a shortcut. Instead, you're taking a slower and less effective path to thinking in Spanish. I work with a team of expert Spanish linguists, and in our experience, thinking in your own language is something you'll be doing for a while, and that's okay. In fact, we've learned that translating in your head can be a gift, not a curse. We've coached thousands of English speakers to Spanish fluency, and one crucial part of the process is learning to think in Spanish. But the most consistently reliable way to get there is to use diligent study techniques that help you turn your English thoughts into Spanish thoughts efficiently. In other words, the journey looks roughly like this. For a while, you'll be thinking in English and translating into Spanish. Then, for a while, you'll actually be thinking in English and Spanish simultaneously. Then, eventually, you'll find that you're simply thinking in Spanish. Don't let anyone convince you based on their pet theories that you should skip straight to step 3. It's simply unrealistic and will discourage you. If you're like 100% of other English speakers learning Spanish, you'll keep catching yourself thinking in English and then translating, and you'll think that you're somehow doing something wrong. You'll feel like a failure because this theoretically should work for you, but it doesn't, and eventually you'll give up. But if that's your experience, there's nothing wrong with you. Skipping straight to thinking in Spanish is just not a realistic goal for any language learner. Instead, I'm here to tell you that there is a proven way to make it all the way to thinking in Spanish, step by step, without that discouragement. It's worked for thousands of our students, and it'll work for you too. So today I'm going to share my 7 steps to thinking in Spanish. This research-based 7-step routine is great for internalizing the heart of the Spanish language, and it's a repeatable process that will work for you over and over. In other words, if you make a habit of doing these 7 steps again and again, you'll be thinking in proper Spanish, including correct grammar and sentence structure, very quickly. My team started using this technique after reading A Mind for Numbers. This is one of my favorite books on how to learn, and in this book, Barbara Oakley lays out a step-by-step process for learning mathematical formulae. We've adapted her process and applied it to language learning, and the results with our students have been extraordinary. So major thanks to Barbara Oakley for these techniques. Alright, let's dive in and learn the 7 steps. Each of these steps may seem small, but if you follow the process, I guarantee it will work for you. When you run Spanish sentences through this process, you'll find yourself thinking in Spanish more and more every day. Step 1 is to study one native written Spanish sentence. Yes, we're starting this process with just one sentence first. Choose a sentence that you find just a little bit challenging. Maybe it uses a difficult verb conjugation, or maybe the sentence structure is a little bit tricky for you. I recommend finding something that was written by a native Spanish speaker, not a fake example from a bad textbook. Maybe use a Spanish children's book or an online article on a subject that interests you. With our coaching students, what we do is our native speaking coaches come up with a custom sentence that's optimized for what the student needs to work on in the moment. But you can come up with something on your own as long as it's an authentic Spanish sentence written by a native speaker, not an English speaker. To complete step 1, what you're going to do is simply read this sentence out loud to yourself a couple of times. Then, hide it and try to write or speak the sentence from memory. Then look back at the original. If you got it right, congrats! You've started to learn the sentence. As an example, let's say I'm practicing the sentence, no se lo tienes que dar, which means you don't have to give it to them. This is actually a sentence that we recently gave to a student who wanted more practice with object pronouns. So here's a video of me pretending to practice this sentence, covering it up, writing it down, and seeing that I got it right. Once you've just begun to memorize the sentence, great job! It's time to go on to step 2. Step 2 is to write a variation on the sentence. Change either the tense, the pronouns, or some other aspect of the sentence that you find challenging. The new sentence should be extremely similar to the original. Usually only 1 or 2 words will change. For example, the sentence no se lo tienes que dar might change to no me lo tienen que dar, which means they don't have to give it to me. It's basically the exact same sentence, except that we changed around who's doing what. And that's one of the great things about using grammar-heavy sentences like this. It doesn't use very many words, but it can be adapted in all kinds of ways, including the ways that you'll actually need to adapt a sentence when you're using it in real life. The sentence structure that you see right here can be slightly modified in thousands of ways once it's second nature. You'll be able to use it every day once you're thinking in Spanish. Okay, so now you've written a slight variation on the sentence. At the end of step 2, if possible, you should send your written sentence to a native-speaking friend, relative, or coach for feedback on how you're doing. You want to make sure that you're practicing correctly. If you're going to make these Spanish sentences second nature, it's really helpful to make sure that you're thinking in Spanish the way that native speakers do. Step 3 is to take a break. Study something unrelated, or better yet, go do something active, such as doing housework or taking a walk around the block. This is actually extremely important to the process. By taking a break from the topic, you're actually going to strengthen it because your brain will start to work on it in new ways in the background. Even if you're not actively thinking about Spanish during your break, you just studied a challenging sentence and worked on creating a variation on it, which required a lot of concentration. Now, when you switch to not concentrating, your subconscious mind is going to keep playing with the sentence in the background, which means that that sentence, along with variations on it, are well on their way to becoming natural thoughts in Spanish. For more about why taking breaks can be so effective at helping you learn Spanish faster, check out our video, Learn Spanish Faster by Taking a Walk. Step 4. Return to the same sentence later the same day. Ideally, do this just before going to bed. This will help solidify it in your mind to help it transition from conscious knowledge to subconscious thinking in Spanish. The way to do this is to once again speak and write the original sentence from memory and see if you got it right, just like you did in step 1. Then, write yet another variation on it, just like in step 2. To make this as effective as possible, focus on the parts of the sentence that are giving you trouble. Here I've chosen to rewrite it as no se lo tiene que decir, using the same structure but changing the verb dar to the verb decir, since that's going to be really handy in lots of real-life contexts. This review of the sentence later in the day gives you all the benefits of steps 1 through 3, plus it solidifies them by showing your brain that this type of Spanish structure is something you're going to return to again and again. Step 5. The next day, return to the sentence again. Now that you've slept on it, you'll find that once again reciting it from memory like in step 1 and writing a variation on it like in step 2 comes much more naturally than it did just the previous day. And once again, give special focus to the aspects of the sentence that you find tricky. So this time I've written, no se lo tengo que decir a él, which means I don't have to say it to him. So I've added a little bit of complication by putting a redundant indirect object in there, but nothing too far outside of what I'm comfortable with for now. Step 6. Choose a new sentence to study. Based on what you found challenging while studying that sentence, find a new native written Spanish sentence to tackle. This time I'm going to choose me di cuenta de que no estaban aquí, which means I realized that they weren't here. To complete step 6, you'll actually do steps 1 through 5 again using this new sentence. So my variations here are going to include me doy cuenta de que no están aquí, which changes it to the present tense, and then ¿Te diste cuenta de que yo no estaba aquí? Which turns it into a question and asks, did you realize that I wasn't there? All right, after that, choose yet another sentence. Step 7. Do active repetitions. Here's the fun part. As you continue to accrue more and more challenging sentences, you should practice all of them, and in particular do what Barbara Oakley calls active repetitions. This means reviewing the sentences in your mind while doing something active, such as working out, doing housework, or commuting to work. This will help enormously with your ability to think in Spanish. First of all, it solves a problem that many of us have. We tend to think about Spanish only while studying it, and then we forget to put in any effort when we're not sitting down and focusing on it. When you make active repetitions a priority, it can help you find more time to work on thinking in Spanish. But just as importantly, this will help you turn those Spanish sentences into Spanish thoughts that are relevant to real life, because you'll be able to relate the sentences to what you're doing. As an off-the-wall example, let's say I'm doing laundry and I'm rehearsing these two sentences in my mind. No se lo tienes que dar, me di cuenta de que no estaban aquí. So even with just these two sentences, I can think of all kinds of ways to use them to talk about the laundry. And yeah, maybe I'll feel like I'm acting like a crazy person if I'm all by myself saying weird Spanish sentences like se lo tengo que dar a la lavadora, or me di cuenta de que la ropa estaba ahí, but just have fun with it. What's going to happen while you do this is these sentences will quickly start to transfer from just being textbook Spanish that you're studying and turn into genuine Spanish that you're using and thinking in real life. This will especially be true if you're using good, solid core sentences like these, which are super versatile. That's why we start all of our coaching students with lots of grammar, because they end up thinking in Spanish much faster. All right, those are the 7 steps, and the key is to keep running through all 7, adding one sentence at a time. When Barbara Oakley describes this technique in A Mind for Numbers, she refers to these units, such as individual sentences in Spanish, as chunks. So these chunks will build up quickly in your mind, growing together over time, and turning into an interconnected web until your whole mind is full of Spanish thoughts that can apply to just about any situation very quickly. In other words, if you follow these 7 steps over and over, you'll be thinking in Spanish more and more quickly, one step at a time. If you have any suggestions for getting better at thinking in Spanish, I'd love to hear them. Leave a comment on this video and subscribe to this channel for more tried and true study techniques for achieving genuine Spanish fluency.